Hey, Harvester, I am so glad you are here on this Labor Day weekend. It is so good to see so many of you here. We are wrapping up a series that we're calling Jesus in the Spirit. And anybody here last week for this one? Man, we had an amazing service last week, an amazing message by Pastor Nick, a great time of worship by Brad Streeter and his wife. And for those of you who didn't know, that was his wife next to him. I had a few people say, why did he tell that girl he loved her? It's because they're married, that's why. That was his wife last week. This one, just a friend that's right next to him. But we're super glad you're here. This has been a great series that we're in, where we're talking about Jesus in the Spirit. Now, if you've been following along over the last 7 weeks, you know that we actually started with a 4-week series called Jesus in the Flesh, where we were looking at the different instances of Jesus' humanity and how he felt the things that we feel and that he's human like you're human. And then we switched gears and we said, but he's not just human like you're human, he is also divine. And he has this relationship with God that we can watch that relationship and we can learn from that relationship. And so this whole series, we've been looking at different instances of how Jesus and the Spirit intermingled together and how they interacted with God. And we're going to end it today by talking one more time about how Jesus was stirred by the Spirit and what he did in that stirring. Now, we're talking a lot about the Spirit these last few weeks, and I wanted to give you a Greek word. Is that okay? Can we go to language class real quick? The Greek word for Spirit is the word pneuma. Everybody say pneuma. Pneuma, like pneumonia. Pneuma. And the reason it's pneuma and how pneumonia and pneuma relate is that, yes, it's translated spirit, but you can also translate that word breath. Like the Spirit has to do with that life force in us, that breath in our lungs. You remember Genesis chapter 1 when Adam was created and God created this mound of dirt. What did he do to give that mound of dirt life? He breathed in his Spirit. There was this breath, this Spirit that goes into this mound, and it comes to life and it brings it life. For the rest of the scriptures, the Spirit is known as the Spirit or the wind of God or the breath of God. It's this life-giving force of God. And the thing I know about breath is that it's a multi-directional function, right? Breathing isn't just unidirectional, is it? Everybody, let's breathe together. Everybody breathe in. Now hold it. We're going to see how unidirectional breathing is. Once people start passing out, then you can release your breath, okay? No, go ahead and let it out. Right? Breathing was meant to go 2 ways. It was meant to go in, and it was also meant to go out. The Spirit was meant to fill you, to go in, but the Spirit was also meant to go out. And that's what I love about Jesus' interaction with the Spirit. For Jesus, life in the Spirit was a rhythm with the Spirit. It wasn't just a, let me get away so that I can be filled by the Spirit of God. Let me do things for God so that I can be filled with the Spirit of God. But it was Jesus being filled with the Spirit of God so that he could go out and cast out the Spirit of God onto the people that he was loving and ministering to and praying over and healing. That life force went out of him to other people. Now, I think the danger of modern day Christianity, specifically recently, is this idea that in order to be close to God, we have to withdraw from everything else. That we have to just go be filled with the Spirit. We have to get away into silence and solitude. Last week, we talked about the importance of silence and solitude. And I believe it's something we need to grab a hold of. But I think many people are grabbing a hold of that to the point of, I just want to go into the silent places and be filled and be filled. Breathe in, be filled with the Spirit. And I think God in the whole time is saying, but I also want you to breathe it out. I also want you to take what I'm doing in you and breathe it out onto your family, onto your friends, onto your coworkers, onto a lost and wounded world so that they can have life as well. When you look at Jesus' life, that's the rhythm he lived. Jesus lived a rhythm of inward journey of being filled and then an outward journey of spilling that over onto others. It was inward. He would get away to quiet places to pray and to desolate places to pray. And then he would go out among the crowds. And he would speak the truth and speak in love, and he would care, and he would spill out that Spirit. And then he would withdraw to lonely places to pray. He would breathe in the Spirit, and then he'd go and breathe it out into the cities. You look at Jesus, breathing was a rhythm. And so what I want to look at today is that the Spirit doesn't just fill us. The Spirit doesn't just send us, but or the Spirit doesn't just lead us, but the Spirit also sends us. We are also to be sent by the Spirit. And a great example of that in Jesus' life comes in Mark chapter 6. We're going to look at the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, this is the only miracle that happens in all four Gospels. And so this is a pretty important miracle to look at. And when we think of Jesus feeding the 5,000, we're often drawn to the miraculous moment where the loaves and the fish were somehow spread among 5,000 plus people. But I think there's something underneath the surface that we often miss in what's happening. And I think it's the movement of the Spirit and what the Spirit's doing in that miracle. So let's look at that. Mark chapter 6, starting with verse 30. It says this. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all they had done and all they had taught. And he said to them, Jesus said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. See, Jesus is looking at the disciples here, and they have just been through a lot of ministry. He'd sent them out from town to town. This is the time where he's like, go out and proclaim the gospel. I hope they welcome you in. If they don't, shake the dust off of your feet. You're going to see the Spirit do amazing things. They go out and they spend days in cities doing the work. They come back to Jesus, and they are exhausted. Jesus looks at them, and they're completely exhausted. And so what does Jesus say? He says, come away by yourself to a desolate place and rest a while. Do you see this inward journey that he's calling him into? This moment of silence and solitude to be filled with the Holy Spirit. That's what he's calling him into right now. But this is what happens. It says, for many were coming and going. Many people of the crowd that they were witnessing to were coming and going. And the apostles had no leisure even to eat. So not only are they wore out, but these guys are hungry. They want some food. They've been feeding people spiritually with the word of God, haven't had any time to eat any food. And so it says in verse 32, they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now, many of the people in the crowd saw them going and recognized them. Those are the disciples. Those are the people who have the miracle power. It says, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got to the desolate place ahead of them. Verse 34. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And what did he do? He went to work again. He began to teach them many things. Now let me set the mood for you here. We've got the apostles who they're exhausted. They're not just exhausted, but it says they are hungry. They are ready to eat and feast, and they just want to be alone with Jesus. They've done the work of Jesus, and they're ready just to retreat back to that place of silence and solitude and finally be filled by Jesus instead of just pouring out on other people. But you got to know that Jesus is in a rough spot too. Jesus sent the apostles out, but Jesus just went through something traumatic as well. Jesus just learned that his cousin, John the Baptist, was beheaded. And so in this moment, Jesus is in this tremendous place of grief. And so he's not just going to a desolate place for the benefit of the 12, he's going to a desolate place for his benefit as well. He wants to spend some time with the Father. But then they get on the boat, and so they cross this lake. They're going towards this desert area, no towns in sight, no stores in sight, no people living here. They finally get to the other side, and they see thousands of people waiting on them in this desert area. Now, if that's you, what are you thinking? What's going through your mind in that moment? Are you kidding me? Seriously? We're trying to get away and they're here. This is my weekend. I'm supposed to be off in this moment. We would be annoyed. We would be disturbed. We would be distraught. You know what it says Jesus felt? He had compassion on them. Jesus sees these thousands of people, and he's not annoyed by them. He's not disturbed by them. He's not discomforted by them. Something happens on the inside of him where it's like the Spirit wells up in him. Something begins to stir, even in his emptiness, even in his grief. Something begins to stir in him, and it says he has compassion on them. And here's what I think we learn from Jesus in this moment. That when the Spirit moves, move. when the Spirit moves, when the Spirit stirs in you, what do? You don't retreat, you move into it. You lean into that moment. You go into that moment. Jesus, he was going to silence and solitude, but the Spirit stirred inside of him. He had compassion, and so he taught them because they looked like a people in need. I think often we kind of miss those moments, don't we? Jesus, he looked at the crowd and he had compassion on them. When's the last time that you looked at somebody from a place of emptiness and you had compassion on them? Usually what we do is we have compassion on ourselves. Anytime we're in a place of emptiness, our eyes get turned inward and we have this compassion on ourselves because in those moments what we've learned to do is we've learned to tune out the pain of everybody else around us so that we can deal with the pain that's within us. Or we say, Jesus, I know there's a lot of pain out there, but what about me? What about the stuff that I'm dealing with? What about my pain? And often I don't think we feel compassion because of that. Sometimes I think we don't feel compassion just because we've learned to insulate ourselves from the people or from the needs. Like we create this bubble around us and these white picket fences and this place of perfection around us where we don't see the needs around us. We don't see people who are in pain. We've created this bubble where it's like, there is no pain in the world. I don't know what everybody's complaining about. Things seem to be great. Things seem to be wonderful in my life. Why is everybody so up in arms? And we don't have compassion because we don't see it. I think some of us, we don't have compassion because we just have this strong aversion to discomfort and conflict. How many of you would admit that that's you? That it's like, I just don't like conflict. I don't like difficult circumstances. So I do see the need, but it makes me uncomfortable. And I don't want to step into someone else's conflict or what's happening in their life. I don't want to step into anyone else's pain. And so what I do is I step away and I ask Jesus to fix me or fix the general brokenness or wounds in the world, hoping that somebody out there will help them. I love what Jesus does. The Spirit wells up in him. Jesus was moved, so he moved. And what did he do? It says that he began to teach them many things. Many, many things he began to teach them. You think I teach long. Jesus, what we find out in this passage is that he just teaches and teaches and teaches, and the hours are going by, and the days going by, and the sun's going down, where it gets to this point in verse 35, where the disciples have just had enough. It says this, when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, Jesus, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countrysides and villages, and they can buy themselves something to eat. But Jesus answered them, you give them something to eat. I love Jesus. I love how he just comes back. He's not poking around here. He's not messing around. He says, you want me to send them away? How about this? How about I send you to them? That's what I really want to do. That's what he really wanted to do. And I think one of the things that we need to ask ourselves is this question. Did the Spirit send me, the person I'm trying to send away? Did the Spirit send me, the person that I'm trying to send away? I think that's what Jesus is trying to get to with the disciples. He's saying, you're telling me to send them away when the Spirit is sending them to you. He says, send them away. I want you to go to them and feed them. But the disciples have got to be thinking, we just spent all day feeding them. We gave them the teaching. We gave them the gospel message. You've been teaching all day. We have fed them spiritually. Now send them away so they can be fed physically. I think the Holy Spirit may have had something else in mind that day. To feed them spiritually as well as to feed them physically. Sometimes, though, I think we draw a line between the two. It's like, well, our job is just to give them the truth. Our job is just to give them the gospel. As long as we do that, the needs are going to be around forever. Let them go deal with it themselves. Let them go figure it out themselves. Let them go to government agencies. They can figure it out. The disciples are like, send them away. They'll figure out how to feed themselves. And we're still hungry, Jesus. Like, we need to get, like, if you send them away, then we can go. We're in a desolate place, Jesus. We can go out and we can get something to eat. We're the ones that are empty. Look, we're in this desolate place. We got here so that we could be filled. Send them away so that we can be filled. I think we need to ask ourselves the question, did the Spirit send them to us? If so, why are we sending them away? This is a point that is not just for you, but it's a point that is written for me. In fact, no kidding, this week, it was on Thursday of this week, I'm writing this message, and it's about 10:25 in the morning on Thursday, and I'm writing the message, and my assistant Bailey comes in, and she says, Nikomas, I know you have a meeting at 10:30, but there's someone out in the lobby of the office, and they're asking for a pastor. They'd like to talk to a pastor. You know what I said? I said, no, I can't. I've got a meeting at 10:30, and I'm writing a message. I got 5 minutes to write this, and then a meeting. But here's what I'm thinking in my mind. This office building is full of pastors. This office building is full of people who are loving and caring. Someone. Does it have to be me in this moment? I don't think it does. And so I said no, and then this is what I'm typing. Did the Spirit send me the person I'm sending away? What was that? No, I don't have time. I'm writing this thing right here for these people that I'm going to see on Sunday. They're going to want to hear this. This is going to change their lives. I went to the meeting. After the meeting, I felt horrible about it. So I go out she'd been taking care of. Meg Skaggs, one of our group pastors, had the heart that I didn't have to step in and care for it. And I got to tell you, I just repent of that moment. I hate that the Spirit potentially sent me someone that I sent away. And for me, I look at that and I'm like, Nikomas, that's sin in your heart that you wouldn't take that opportunity. And I think maybe I'm not the only one there. Maybe many of us pass up those opportunities. I think the disciples were trying to pass up those opportunities, and someone drops into our office during a hard day of work. You ever had that happen? Someone drops into your office, hard day of work, and they want to talk, and you just want to get back to work. Or you notice that someone is just in a state of just pain, and you can step in, or you could pretend like you didn't see it. Or someone in your school is going through a rough day and you say nothing, or a parent is sitting on the bleachers next to you having a conversation that sounds painful and you hear it, but you're like, man, I don't want them to know that I heard it, so maybe I won't step in to help. Or it's, man, this is my day off. This is my only day off this week. This is my only time off in a while, or this is my vacation time, or this is my time with my family, or there are better people than me that can handle this, or what am I going to give to them? I don't have anything to offer in this moment. What am I going to do? And we start making up all these excuses to send people away that I think the Spirit might be sending to us. And making up excuses is what we did, and it's what the disciples did as well. Jesus says, you guys, I want you to be the ones who feed them. And you know what they do? They begin to make excuses. It goes on to say this in verse 37. It says, the disciples said to Jesus, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? This is a sarcastic statement they're making. They're saying, shall we go and buy, it's 6 months' wages, like take 6 months of your salary. Do you want us to somehow come up with 6 months' worth of money and go to the towns this late at night and buy food and bring it back here? Jesus, do you know how ridiculous that sounds? There are better ways to do this. And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. What I love about Jesus here is that while the disciples were focused on what they lacked, Jesus was focused on what they possessed. The disciples, they look at themselves and they're like, we're empty. We have no food. We have no money. We don't have the ability to go, like, what do you want from us, Jesus? Look how empty we are. And Jesus turns the table and he says, well, tell me what you have. You're so focused on what you don't have and what you're incapable of. But Jesus is like, what do you have? Because whatever you have plus Jesus is all you need. Whatever you have, plus Jesus is all you need. If you're empty and you have nothing, but you look around and you see Jesus there, you have all you need to meet that need. So Jesus tells them, what do you have? Go and see. So that's what they did. They go and they look and they take inventory of what they have. They're seeing thousands, possibly over 10,000 people there, and they come back and this is what they said. It says, when they had found out, they said, here's what we have. We have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Then Jesus commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So the people sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, Jesus looked up to heaven. He said a blessing. He broke the loaves, and then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. I love verse 42. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Now it says 5,000 men because whenever you're counting the people in the crowd, they would typically just count the men. But there would be women there would be children there were families there, and so there's potentially over 10,000 people. And they were all satisfied. They all ate and they were all satisfied. So here's the question that I have when I read this passage. Who was hungry in the crowd? Who was hungry in the crowd? You read this passage, and obviously, like the 5,000, right? The 5,000, they were hungry. It was late at night. They had no food. When they searched around among the thousands of people, there were only 5 loaves and 2 fish to be eaten. Who was hungry? The crowd was hungry. 5,000 men was hungry. The women were hungry. The children were hungry. The family was hungry. But the story started with 12 men being hungry. Who was hungry in the crowd? It was the 12 disciples. You know, I think we often call this passage the feeding of the 5,000 when I wonder if it's just as appropriate to call it the feeding of the 12. They all ate and they were satisfied. It wasn't just the crowd that walked away fed. It was the disciples who walked away fed. Not only fed, but then it ends by saying they took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces and of the fish. How many disciples are there? 12. Here's what I think the disciples learned this day. That the Spirit fills you in the silence and the sending. The Spirit fills you in the silence, in the desolate places, in the solitude. Yes, he does. He fills you in those times of prayer. You know when he also fills you? When he sends you even when you're on empty. And I think we miss that often. We miss those moments often. You see, these disciples, they were hungry, they were burned out, they were grieving, and they were begging to be filled by Jesus. And their solution was to send people away so that they could be filled. But what they learned is that Jesus can fill them in the midst of the crowd, in the midst of them continuing to give even out of their emptiness. And all of them ate. All of them were satisfied, and there was leftovers as well. Here's what I would tell you today. If you are feeling empty, that you need to be filled by the Spirit, seek out desolate places. Find those moments of silence and solitude where you can get face to face with God. Be filled with His Spirit. But also maybe ask yourself the question, is He sending me as well, or is He sending somebody to me as well? Because some of you might be in desolate places and have built camp and remained in desolate places, in isolated places. And you're like, I'm still empty. I'm in this silence and solitude, and I haven't left this silence and solitude. And why is it that I still feel empty? I'm saying no to everything else so that I can make time and place for this. Maybe the Spirit is sending you to be filled. Maybe He's sending somebody to you to fill them out of your emptiness so that you can be filled as well. And are you serving people? Are you making time for people? Are you giving generously from your time throughout the week to people? Or are you sending away people who the Spirit is sending you? If we're going to be filled by the Spirit, we have to understand that He leads us not just to desolate places, He leads us to desolate people. So that they can be filled, and so that we can be filled in return. You know what that's called? It's a rhythm of breathing. A rhythm of breathing. To breathe in the Spirit so that you can breathe it out. Be filled with the Spirit in desolate places so you can fill people in their desolate places.